Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Tuesday night edition of classes from the Sandy Granite Family History Center here in Sandy, Utah. And you're in for a real treat tonight. We have with us tonight Mr. Miles Meyer, who is actually coming to us from Florida. And I think a lot of us are from a little bit cooler parts of the country. But Miles tonight, the title of his class is How Technology is Increasing Our Access to Records. And Miles is eminently qualified to talk about that. He's a jack of all trades. And he's currently the director of the Vero Beach Family History Center. And he's a frequent presenter on Roots Tech, and currently, and has for quite some time now, served as the education director on the Family History Guide. And he's quite actively and has been involved in genealogical societies, especially in his area, and is constantly doing presentations on all different kinds of parts of genealogy and the Family History Guide. And he's also participated in panels across the US and will be an active presenter and participant in this year's Roots Tech Connect for 2022. And before we turn it over to Miles, I just wanted to remind you that this class is being recorded, and you can find it at the Granite Family History Center's website, which is www.granitefhc.com. And I'll put that link up on the chat. For those of you who have questions, we would ask that you hold those questions until the end of Miles's presentation, or you can also post them on the chat, and I'll check the chat again at the end of the presentation so we make sure to get your questions answered. So without further ado and interruption, we'll turn the time to Miles Meyer. Miles?
Great, thank you very much. And I hope everybody's having a great evening. As was mentioned, the title of this presentation is How Technology is Increasing Our Records, or Increasing Our Access to Records. And we've seen over the last couple of years a great increase in the amount of records that are available to us. Originally, many of us started out searching archives, and those archives are great collections from of various records in physical form. And the documents that are in these collections are generally records that are important events related to the history of that area. So, if you're going to the National Archives, you're going to look at records that are relevant to the national history. If you go to your state archives, it's usually the state history. If you go to your county archives, it's your county histories. If you go to your church archives, it's your church histories. So each of these different archives had different sets of collections. And the public and researchers use those records to gather facts related to their research. But archives are limited in their locations, and they may not be convenient to visit. For example, the National Archives. How many of us had an opportunity to actually go to the National Archives and get a researcher's card in order to do research there? And if you did have that opportunity, how often would you be able to go? Also, archives have limited hours. They're not open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They may be closed on holidays. They may close in the evenings, and they may not be convenient to fit around your schedules. And it might be difficult to locate records in many of these archives. I've been to the National Archives. I've worked in the National Archives after hours, but you have to find the card catalog or the reference numbers for these documents. They may not be on the shelves. They may be in record storage. You'd have to request access to a record storage item, in advance of going to the archives so that it can be pulled and brought out. So there's a lot of, issues about finding the records and making sure that they're available when you go to visit them. And some archives limit how you can use the records. Some limit you to, no photography of the records, or what you're allowed to transcribe out of the records, or even whether you're allowed to touch the records. So, the records in the archives are there for you to do research, but there are limitations on how you can use those records. And some records may only be held in specific archives. So this would require you to visit multiple locations in order to do research. One archive might have the vital records, while another archive might have newspapers or other documentation that you need for your research. And what happens if one of those archives is damaged, and that's the only location where that rare set of documents is stored? A fire, a flood, or some other natural disaster or man-made disaster could result in the entire elimination of a full set of documents that you might need for your research. And I'm sure we've all heard those stories before while we're doing our research. Oh yeah, those records were burned when the city hall burned down, and we don't have those records anymore. Well, that was one set of records stored in one archive and no copies of it anywhere else. And now those records are lost permanently. So in 1938, Family Search began microfilming many of these records. And other organizations also started microfilming their records. If you go to the National Archives, you can access their microfilm records and other records that might have been microfilmed from other sources. And during that time, starting in 1938, they were able to film 2.4 million rolls of microfilm from records around the world. So this microfilming allowed the records to be duplicated and shipped to family history centers around the world, or to other facilities, libraries, and other facilities, so they can have the collections. Many times when they archived or when they microfilmed these records, they would give the archive a copy of those records on microfilm so that they had a copy for their storage. And then, the other copy would be brought back to Granite Mountain for storage. And when somebody went to a family history center, they could request that film be copied and a copy of it sent to the family history center for either temporary or long-term rental. So the microfilm made those records easier to access for researchers. Microfilm also tends to have a long shelf life. But if you've ever gone into a family history center where the microfilm were not stored properly with the right humidity and right temperatures, you can actually smell those microfilms beginning to degrade. You have that vinegars type smell that they produce. And, if they get too wet, they will deteriorate. If they're too dry, they will crack. So you had to maintain the right climatic conditions for the microfilm to keep that long shelf life. But it also allowed libraries and other smaller facilities to have access to large collections of important documents. So they no longer had to have all of this shelf storage area for these records. They could have cabinets full of microfilm and have thousands of feet of microfilm stored in their facilities that people can access easily. Then in 1998, Family Search began digitizing those microfilm collections, and many other organizations started digitizing their microfilm collections also. In 1998, it was expected that it would take 50 years to digitize all 2.4 million microfilm rolls. So you're looking at that, you're looking at 2050 by the time those films would have been microfilm or digitized. However, that was looking at what Family Search started with. They had 5 employees operating the machines that imaged each page of the microfilm, each image on the microfilm individually. And you would have to crank it forward to the next image, take a picture, crank it forward to the next image, take a picture. In many cases, the digitizing equipment might have missed a picture, or the picture may have been off center and it incorrectly imaged that page of the document. And then they would have to go back and redo those after they did a quality control review of the film. So it wasn't the fastest method. But in 2006, Family Search developed an enhanced digitization software, and that increased the efficiency of the process because it allowed the entire roll of film, of microfilm, to be imaged as one image. And you can see this is an example of what a roll of microfilm imaged would look like. And the computer was able to go in and assess whether or not the complete page was digitized. So in this image here, the blue pages are the ones that are completely digitized. The yellow ones and the red ones are where there were errors in the digitization. So you'll see that maybe a column was the only thing that got digitized, or maybe half a page was digitized because of the way it was laid out. And so the person who was doing a quality control check on these could go in and could reassess those boxes and say, actually, this page is this area, this whole area here, and make sure that those yellow and red boxes actually did cover entire pages. So the staff grew from 5 people in Family Search doing this to 30 people operating 26 scanners by 2019. So it took 20 years for it to go from those 5 people to 30 people and using 26 scanners. And that then allowed them to microfilm all 2.4 million rolls of microfilm, to digitize those rolls of microfilm in only 23 years. So by 2021, they were complete with those digitized microfilm rolls. And now Family Search was able to digitally collect over 11.5 billion people from over 200 records, or 200 countries, in more than 100 languages in their digitization process. So you can go to some countries like Germany and England, and you'll have large, extensive collections of records. And you can go to other countries, you know, for example, Senegal or Congo, and you'll have very few record sets for those countries because there were very few microfilms made of their records in the Family Search collection. So now Family Search has 15 people who are assigned to find, identify, classify, and recommend new records to be added to their collections. And then they have 330 camera teams around the world in over 50 countries accessing those records and digitizing those records. So they're going straight from paper to digital format. And those teams can capture up to 140 million new digital images each year. So that is a huge number of new records each year being added to Family Search. And so how do they prioritize those records? Well, this is the same way that most of the archives prioritize their records. First of all is by demand. There are certain records that have high demand and are therefore important to be digitized and added to collections. In Family Search's case, some countries have higher numbers of ancestors for the people who are doing genealogy research, and therefore those countries would have higher demand. They also look at the genealogical value of the records. Some records are of greater genealogical value. So for example, a census versus a dog license. A dog license can have genealogically important information. It has the owner of the dog's name, and it has the owner's address. So in this case here, if you have to get a dog license every year, you can track where that owner, you know, where the owner of that dog lived every year for the life of that dog. And then maybe they got another dog and you can track it, you know, using the dog's name, tracking where that owner lived for the, you know, for many years. While on the other hand, a census only gives you their residence every 10 years. So there's a gap in there, but the genealogical value of the census is that it gives you a lot more information. So it'll have occupation, age, marital status, family relationships, state of birth, country of the birth, where the parents were born, and a variety of other bits of information that can help you in your genealogy research. And then risk is another category for prioritizing records. Some records are at more risk than the others, and that risk can be due to political strife, natural disaster, improper storage, or any variety of other reasons. So a country that has low demand may have records that have high genealogical value and maybe at high risk. So it might be more important in some cases to digitize those records, store them in an archive before you get to records that have higher demand but less risk. So when those teams go out and digitize those records, they used to digitize them and put them on a hard drive or CD or DVD ROMs. And then when those media were full, they would then ship them back to Family Search or to the archives. And then those would be reviewed, quality controlled, quality checked. And then after all of that process would then be uploaded. So it could take several weeks, several months for a record from the time when it's digitized to the time when it became available online. Now, though, they don't do that process. All of these digitized images go directly to cloud storage. And then they can just download that cloud storage to the archive or to Family Search. And so you could potentially image the records in the morning, and by that evening, they would be available for somebody in the United States to look at on Family Search. Now, those records are not indexed, but they are moved over into the historical image collection on Family Search. And you can see the last time I captured an image off of this page, there was 4.8 billion images on this historic images page, but that goes up by several hundred every minute. So you're talking about 140 million new images added to this collection every year. And less than 20% of the images in Family Search are actually indexed and searchable by surname. And each year, that 140 million new images that are added adds another 10 years to the backlog of indexing. It takes us 10 years to index 1 year's worth of digital images. So we're never going to catch up with the volunteers who are doing all of the indexing of these images. And Family Search appreciates all the work that's being done by these volunteers in the indexing process, but we have to find a new methodology in order to make these records searchable more quickly. So we now have an improved indexing process that is still, not quite all the way ready to go, but is being used, and that is artificial intelligence and computer learning. This allows the computer to begin to learn handwriting and to be able to find specific words and text within documents. So what it looks for are dates, places, and names. And it finds that information and it works on indexing those images. For example, this is a church record from Guatemala. And the Family Search's handwriting recognition software went through this, and you can see that dates, names, and other information that's pertinent to finding those records are highlighted and color-coded. If you go down to the index below, and you can highlight the individuals within that index, and their names will show up within this record, which is something that doesn't happen when you look at the records that have been hand indexed. You can't see where that record is located on the record itself. But if I go down to the next name, it might be the father's name here, and it'll highlight the father's name. It'll go down to the next and find the mother's name, and you can highlight that, and it'll show up right exactly where it is in the document. And when you find these computer indexed images, you'll see the little tab that's down here in the lower right-hand corner. It says this record was indexed by a computer. If you find an error, click here to report it. And the benefit of that is if you do find that the computer has misrepresented or indexed something, they spelled the name wrong or whatever it might be, you can go in there and tell them that there's an error and that this is what it should be. And the computer uses that to learn the process. And so don't ignore it if there's an error in the computer indexed materials, because the computer is learning when people tell it that there's an error and what the word should be. So back during RootsTech 2021, Family Search provided a beta version of this software that anyone attending RootsTech could use. And so we were able to go in to the software and upload our own records and have the handwriting recognition translate them. And you can see here all of the different languages that were available: Arabic, Armenian, Cyrillic, Portuguese, Vietnamese, Greek. So the document I have here is German. And so I would have clicked on German, and then I would have, hit the start button. And in about 30 seconds, it produced a transcription of this document. It highlighted the dates, locations, and names. And I could then use this to say, yes, that's correct, or no, it missed something. You can see it missed a couple names. It found a name, some of the things were like, well, that's maybe a place, it might be a location. But it was able to find the majority of the information, and then it transcribed it over to the right-hand side in German, and then I could hit translate to English, and then I had an English translation of this document. So again, this was a beta test that they allowed us to play with during RootsTech last year. So we moved to the 1950 census. And the interesting thing is here is that the 1950 census, which comes out April 1st, will have a computer indexed name provided to it. So all of those names will be computer indexed within a few weeks of the release of the 1950 census. What's going to happen on the night, March 31st, I guess it's 31st, the National Archives will move the 1950 census from their cloud storage at Amazon to Family Search, to Ancestry, to MyHeritage, to all of the different organizations that are getting copies of it. Those will all be dumped to their cloud storage within a couple minutes. And then on April 1st, the websites, Family Search, Ancestry, and everybody will open up to an unindexed version of the 1950 census. You'll be able to look at the enumeration districts, your towns, your counties. You'll be able to go page by page, and looking for your information. But in the background, Ancestry's computer AI indexing program will be running. And it'll be running one state at a time. And as each state is complete, all of the computer indexed information will become available for that state. And so, let's say Alabama is the first state and you want to go in and do a search. You can wait the week or two, and then all of a sudden it'll pop up and Alabama will be searchable. Volunteers will then start cross-checking that handwriting recognition to make necessary edits and make a final index of that information. Go back to this once more, and there will be at RootsTech 2022, Family Search will be releasing an app that will allow you to go in and start editing those documents, those computer indexed information. Now notice RootsTech is March and the 1950 census is April. So what is RootsTech going to give us in this app in March? Well, they don't want us to tell you what record set is going to be released, but there will be a record set released in March with this app that will be the test record set. And you will be able to go into that record set and start verifying the index for that record set. And then on April 1st, they're going to switch over to the 1950 census. And then everybody with that app can then work on the 1950 census, validating the computer recognition software. So how do other sites get their materials online and searchable? So some sites like Europeana hold transcribathons. And that is, they organize crowdsourcing events to transcribe certain groups of letters. If you've never been to Europeana, it's a multinational European archive. And so they have records from all across the European Union and other parts of the European continent, various different record sets that they have there from those countries. And let's say they want to do a transcribathon on World War II killed in action records. And so they'll say, we're going to do a transcribathon on this set of records. What language do you want to work on? And when are you available during this period? And you can then access those records and do that. Many other sites have similar types of programs. And some archives, you can transcribe the records as you're looking at them. So for example, the Basse-Rhine region of Alsace-Lorraine, if you're in the archives, the French archives for Basse-Rhine, it has an index icon right there on the record. And so you can pull up the record, you can hit index, and you can type in the information that's there. Or if you go to the Trove archives in Australia, they give you a OCR, optical character recognition transcription of the page, and you can go in and physically edit the OCR to correct it for an entire newspaper or book, the page in that newspaper or that book, or just an article. So there are those opportunities as you're doing research to transcribe individual documents. And once it's transcribed, then that makes it searchable to everybody else who comes after you. Now, what's coming up and what's already existing is in BYU's record linking labs, they have a couple programs. One is called reverse indexing. And reverse indexing helps the computers recognize handwriting. So when you're in the reverse indexing app, the computers have already gone through and read the handwriting. And you can tell it, give me all the records that have Meyer in it, or whatever the last name you want to research. And it will pull up these little snippets of all of the text, and it says Meyer, or the computer says this says Meyer. And you can read through all of those and say, do they all say Meyer? If they don't, if there's one that doesn't, you can click on it and submit it as a potential error. So I'm looking through this list right here of these 12 images, and they all look like they say Meyer, except for maybe that second one from the left on the top row. It looks like it's M-E-Y-E-S maybe. And so I would click that one and submit it and say, this might be an error. Somebody else might want to look at that to validate it. But when you send back those, yes, these are correct, or this is wrong, that helps the computer learn the language and learn the handwriting, and it makes it better as it goes through this process. So you could go to that indexing.familytech.byu.edu website, and you can play with the reverse indexing app. Or you can play with the Indexing Go app. And this allows you to index records one word at a time. So it will give you a word, and you will type what you see in that word. And the computer has already guessed what the word is. It wants to see if what you're typing matches what the computer guessed the word as. And you can then tell that this word is foreman, F-O-R-E-M-A-N. It will do things such as occupations, state names, location names, personal names, first names, last names, and so on. So you can read different parts of the document that the computer has already indexed and tell it if it's doing the right thing. And then we move into cloud storage. So cloud storage allows for large amounts of data to be stored more cheaply. It allows large numbers of people to access that data simultaneously. It provides a platform for easy access to the records, and it provides redundancy to reduce downtime. So you can have a set of records on Ancestry that Family Search references. And you can provide that link, or you can go to MyHeritage and do a search, and it says, oh, those records are on Family Search. Click here, and it'll send you back to the Family Search record. That means that they don't have to store duplicates of all of these records. If Family Search already has some of these records in their cloud storage, why should I store those records in my cloud storage? I'll just provide a link and link back to them. The redundancy is that there are redundant cloud storage facilities across the US for Amazon. So you would see Family Search utilizing the Amazon server, and you may be accessing it through the Virginia hub. But if they have a power outage, they have generators and everything to reset. But if they have a power outage, they may instantaneously shift you over to the West Coast for their access to their other cloud storage there. And so you don't notice a problem. You don't find that downtime that you would if the data was only being stored in one location. As I mentioned, the 1950 census is stored on the Amazon server. So the National Archives, Family Search, Ancestry, and others are using Amazon servers. So all they have to do is copy and paste the files to each of these databases. Much quicker way to distribute the data than it was to pack them all up on cases of hard drives, put them on an airplane, fly them out to Salt Lake City, unhook them, take them off the airplane, drive them to the Family Search labs, hook them all up to the multiple computers, dump them onto a mainframe server. And now you're, all trying to access that mainframe server on April 1st, because you want to get the first data off of the records. And what happened last time that big surge took place? All the servers went down. We don't have that problem anymore with Amazon servers. And there are now new legal mandates. And these legal mandates are not necessarily technology, but they're really pushing to get more and more records available. So those legal mandates have opened up access to more records. Organizations like Reclaim the Records, they file Freedom of Information Act and open data requests to local governments or state governments or national governments. And those requests make more records available to the public. When they win one of these Freedom of Information Act or open data request lawsuits, those records become available. So they've been focusing in on states like New York, where they have very stringent limitations on what records can be released. And they've been winning a lot of cases there that you'll start seeing that as soon as they can start digitizing those records, they would be, put out and available for everyone to access. And also, you're going to see in the European archives more and more and more of their records being opened up and put on digital format and available over the internet, because the European Union has a new set of laws that promote more open access to records. They do not want archives to be these limited, closed sort of systems where only a certain group of people have access to those records. They want to make sure that everyone in the European Union has access to the records for their countries. And that means also in the United States, when we access those archives, we do have to agree to utilize the archives within their legal mandates, and we have to accept all their cookies and everything else is associated with the European Union. But we now have access to more and more of those records, and more of those records are being added every month to those databases for your access. So what we're seeing now with this increase in technology and increase in storage capacity and ability to access and crowdsourcing and computer AI and everything that's going on, you're going to start seeing an exponential increase in the availability of records, and not just having the records available, but having them indexed, searchable, and linkable to your research. So I'll stop there and we can open up to any questions.
Thanks, Miles. I'm not seeing any over on the chat. So if you have a question for Miles, unmute yourself. and fire away. I think everybody is still in shock. That was great, Miles, as usual. Very, very detailed and specific. Great stuff.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of my favorite things, is how new technology is making research for us and for everyone so much more accessible. And, you know, generally the audiences that I'm speaking to are the genealogy audiences. But when I'm talking to people at Family Search about development access and things like that, I talk about multiple users. You know, how can sociologists utilize the 1950 census to come up with trends, you know, in earning or mapping, you know, GIS people, Geographic Information System. All of the 1950 census now has addresses. So I could take that information and download it as a spreadsheet and build maps to show, you know, where communities were, where immigrant communities might have been located, what was the distribution of each nationality within a block. All of that sort of capability is there, the way that this new data is being integrated into these databases.
Yep, it's going to open up a whole new definition of mining.
Yes.
Mining data. The other thing that hit me when I realized that was the 1950 was coming out. That'll be the first census where I'm actually on it. So
what does the future look like for Asia and Africa, places like that?
Yeah, so, you know, they're getting a lot more of those records added in. What I find amazing is like the Chinese records, because you can track families for thousands of years in the Chinese records. And many of these families have those records, and, you know, that they're there for them to access just at their homes, actually. But how do you get that set of records and put it into a system? And I think Family Search is actively working on a Chinese database that is, you know, linking those thousands of years of data and building the trees along with those so that people can actually access those. You know, Africa, they've gone out and done a lot of the recordings with the oral histories, the tribal histories and things of that sort, where, you know, they have to get those before those people die. And so, you know, you're seeing in Family Search, there's that genealogy section, and the oral histories section is in there. You have the Pacific Islands section in there, and others that they've gone out and done those collections. And people don't even realize that genealogy section is in Family Search. But it, you know, you look at it and say, oh, that's just the old ancestral file or pedigree resource files or whatever it might be. But you start looking through what's actually there, and there's a lot of really important sets of records that are not necessarily in the Family Search catalog.
Good questions. Any other questions for Miles? Great. Well, thank you, Miles. Enjoy the weather and watch out for the falling iguanas.
That's right.
They're in Florida. Thank you so much. And thank you all for attending tonight. And just a reminder that this class and most of the other classes that have been recorded over the last 2 years are available on the Granite Family History website at www.granitefhc.com. And thank you all, and good night.
Thank you.
Good night, all.